we'll start with the Mangalachan. Om Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. So what we covered last time, just to give a quick recap, is we talked about how Vedanta cannot be looked upon as a philosophy or a school of thought, because it cannot be spoken of in the same breath as, you know, the myriad religions that we have in the world, or the different philosophies we have in the world, or the different schools of thoughts and such that we have, that are so prevalent in the world. Because a school of thought is ultimately born of a human mind, and by definition every human mind is limited, it is restricted, because it is a thing, and it is a finite thing, and it can only store finite information, and it can only conjure up finite ideas, and it does not have access to reality, right? Except through the five senses and the other pramanas. So does anyone recall, or does anyone require a recap on what those pramanas are, or are we good with that, and I should just assume that everyone's on the same page with pramanas, because this is critical to Vedanta.
Just a quick recap would be fine, Prashant.
Sure. So we have multiple pramanas. Let's take the ones we are most familiar with. They are called the Pratiksha pramana. Pratiksha really refers to something which is direct, which is very much available to one. So Pratyaksham, for example, you say, like, if Ishvara becomes Pratyaksham, that Ishvara has appeared in front of you, right? So Pratyaksham Brahmasi and Pratyaksham Ishvara, Pratyaksham Bhagwan has manifested before us. So Pratyaksha means something that's very directly perceptible, and so the Pratyaksha pramana are fivefold. You have Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa and Gandha. So these are the five Pratyaksha pramanas. So Shabda refers to the sense of hearing, and I would like, and I've mentioned this last time, but just to still emphasize, the sense of hearing is not the same thing as the ears, and the sense of touch is not the same thing as the skin, and the sense of smell is not the same thing as the nose, and the sense of sight is not the same thing as the eyes, and same thing for the tongue also, the sense of taste. The physical counterparts of these senses are physical, because they are housed within a certain organ that you are able to anatomically put together, or surgically operate upon, or whatever, right? That's in the human anatomy, but that's only the housing or the shell. The senses themselves are subtle, they are sukshma, whereas the physical counterparts of these senses are sthula. So what you call the physical counterparts is golakam, and the senses are the jnanendriyas. Okay, so I'll start using Sanskrit words just to familiarize with the expressions. So the Shabda pramana, which is the sense of hearing, is housed within the cavity of the ears, and you have this whole setup, right, where you have the cochlear, you have the eardrums, and then you have the bone behind it, and then that vibrates, and the cilia vibrate, and then the cilia kind of just create these neural signals which go to your brain, and that gets processed and all. So we're not talking about that mechanism, but the very sukshma sense behind it, which is perceptible in the form of sound, which is available as the very experience of sound, is subtle, and that is not something that one can physiologically or anatomically analyze. Okay, so same applies for the other senses. So these are called the five Pratyaksha pramanas, and they are our windows into the world, because all of the experiences that we gather are through these five windows, the five senses. Then it's not that the only things that we are able to conclude are through the five senses, because of course as human beings we have evolved to use other senses also, and I'm not talking about like ESP and other things, but inference is a pramana itself, because where there is smoke there is fire. I don't see the smoke, I don't see the fire, but the fire is an inference, because I know that you can't have smoke without fire, unless you're talking about dry ice or something. But generally speaking, right, this is just a thumb rule, that you won't have smoke without fire. However, you can have fire without smoke. If you didn't have fire without smoke, your fire alarms would go off everywhere at home, when you're lighting the gas. So you can have fire without smoke, but you can't have smoke without fire, and therefore when you perceive the smoke, you infer that there is fire. That's called this Anumana Pramana, inference. Then you have Arthapatti, which is knowledge of not comparison, but sorry, a two-step or a multi-step inference. If somebody comes to your place daily, they study something with you, they watch a movie with you, whatever it may be. You measure their weight, and then they go home and then they come back the next day. And you measure their weight every single day. And you know that the person has not eaten food at your place, the weight is constant, the weight may even rise. And so therefore you presume that yeah, this person must have eaten outside of your home. Because you know two facts. First fact is that in order to maintain weight, you need to eat. And the second thing is, since that person is not eating at my place, the obvious conclusion is the person is eating outside. So when you combine multiple inferences together, that is what you call presumption. And presumption is a valid means of knowledge. Then you have Anumana. Anumana is comparison. You don't know what a bison is. Let's assume that you've never watched National Geographic or Discovery, or you've never been to the US and driven on the highways. You don't know what a bison is, but you know what a bull is. And so somebody tells you that, okay, next time you visit the US, you'll see this shaggy looking creature with a lot of, it's built like a bull, but it just has a lot of hair superimposed on it. So now you know two things. You've seen a bull before, and you've obviously seen hair before. Unless you're looking at me, in which case I'm losing it. But you imagine that, when you superimpose these two things together, then you form a loose image of what you perceive to be a possible bison. And it may not be a perfect image, but it's a concept you've created by splicing together those two distinct concepts. And then when you do see a bison, you're like, oh yeah, that's a bison. And then the person will be like, wait, the tour guide will ask you, have you visited before? Like, no, but somebody told me that this is the way to recognize it. So that's called Upama. And then you have something that's called Anupallavi. So Anupallavi means knowledge through the absence of something. Knowledge through the absence of cognition, rather, of something. So, the very first time, like when I just read the definition, I'm like, whatever, this doesn't make any sense. This was a long time back, which it was just a definition. But then, as you think about it, it's like, it's extremely important. Because let's say, I hold my hand in front of you all and I say, okay, there is no pot in my hand. And so, what your mind is actually doing is, first of all, you are conjuring up an image of a pot. And then you're looking at my hand and you're seeing the absence of the image that you formed in your head when compared against the actual image that you see of my hand. And the absence of what you see in your head, which is the pot, because I mentioned the word pot, and then the absence of it here implies its lack of presence. Okay, so then somebody will be like, wait, this sounds almost useless, because at least the other examples you could use something. You could put it to some application, but this is extremely useful. We do it all the time. We just don't think about it. For example, when you have a diagnostic test in a medical laboratory, or you're being diagnosed for COVID, for example. So it is a test to the absence of certain things, right? So when you test negative for something, it's looking for certain things. And when those certain things are not found in the blood or in the saliva or any sample that you take, the urine sample, the saliva sample, the blood sample, whatever it may be, when those indicators are absent in those samples, then you say, okay, this particular ailment is not likely to be there. And so that's where you use Anupallavi, right? It's completely used in the diagnostic field, in all forms of diagnostics. It's used in data science also very widely. It's used in the Large Hadron Collider. You smash these particles together. You're trying to a zoo of other particles come out because of the energy, and then you're trying to find the absence of something because you have something called the standard model, and then that predicts that the existence of certain particles and such, and then ultimately you find that, okay, the things that I presumed exist based on the theory that I've posited, I don't see those particles there, therefore for now I can conclude that it's not there, or maybe we don't have the right energy levels to produce them or whatever, right? So that may be another way to look at it. So this Anupallavi is extremely important. But then it again comes back to this original question: what means of knowledge that we've discussed so far can you use to discuss matters of dharma, to understand that if I perform a certain yajna, there's going to be an associated result, or if I do this yajna, it's going to rain. If I do that yajna, it may help with fertility issues. If I do this other yajna, it may help me with my illnesses, whatever. There are different yajnas, there are different pujas, there are different karmas that one can perform in order to arrive at a certain desired result. And so there's no access that these other pramanas have to any of these cause-effect relationships that we just spoke about. So, or what about the Atma, right? Again, like you can't see, taste, touch, smell, hear the Atma. You can't infer the Atma. How do you infer it? Because where there's smoke, there's fire. What sign or symbol do you have that is going to indicate the Atma? Nothing. You can't think about it. Or how can you presume the Atma? Or how can you compare something like the bull and the bison example? Because to compare the Atma against something has to be similar to the Atma. What can be similar to the Atma? So again, there's nothing that can even point towards the Atma. These other sense organs and means of knowledge fall apart. And so ultimately you have something called the Shabda Pramana, but here it's a special Shabda Pramana, not the Shabda Pratyaksham, but the Veda Shabdam, or the Shruti Shabdam, or the Shruti Pramana. And that is a special Shabdam. And I'm glad you suggested that I speak on this, because there's one part which comes to mind which I didn't emphasize the last time. See, there's a special pramana with the sense of hearing that people don't usually think about. For example, when you just have a bunch of sounds, like this statement that I'm currently making, it's just a string of sounds that are stitched together, but it's appearing as a statement. Now, if you are only measuring the sound and you have some device in front of you, you can come to certain conclusions about the sound of it. Like for example, the voice is at a certain pitch or a certain frequency. So that is some knowledge that you have. Or maybe, there's a certain tempo. This is how fast the person speaks, and this is how slowly the person speaks. How spread apart the words are. You can infer something from that. If you do some other data science and analytics, you can figure out based on my intonation whether I'm actually angry or whether I'm speaking in an objective way or a calm way or whatever. You can come up with certain inferences, but ultimately these are just a string of sounds. But the beautiful thing here is when you put a string of sounds together, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Because if you just analyze a single sound, there's no meaning associated with just a single sound. But the sentence, when you put together, there is meaning that comes out of it. And that meaning cannot escape you. Once you hear a sentence, you have no choice but to register the meaning, as long as there's a preparation to register the meaning of that. Which means here the preparation would be that, okay, you need to be familiar with the English language. Or if I speak a different language like Gujarati, then you need to have familiarity with that language. But once that preparation is there, the knowledge simply takes place by the very act of me speaking, which is different from the sounds that you hear individually if you were to break them apart. And so this Shabda Pramana or Shruti Pramana comes under this category, this special category, where it is not just the sounds, but the very meaning that is implied through the string of sounds that are stitched together. And that itself is its own Pramana, and that is Shruti Pramana, that is Veda Pramana, that is the teaching of the Rishis, it is the teaching of Bhagwan. It's not something that we've conjured up, imagined, concocted, fabricated, whatever. It's out there. The meaning is embedded into the very fabric of the cosmos. It is arrived at through the Rishis based on their tapas and based on their clarity of mind and the Shuddha, sattvic antakarana that they have, and they are able to tap into the order because of Ishvara's grace. And we've gone into that process in sufficient detail last time through Q&A, so I'll not repeat that part. But the Rishis are able to simply tap into the truth, the cosmic blueprint of reality, and then through the language which is obviously most well known to them, they are able to communicate it, because every communication requires a certain language. And Vedic Sanskrit happened to be the one that they were associated with, and therefore we have the Vedas. But the Vedas are not authored by the Rishis. The Vedas are not imagined, or they are not a work of fiction. They are the very fact of reality which are transmitted through the Rishis without the Rishis intervening by altering the meaning of it whatsoever. It is just a transmission, not a translation or a whatever. It's a transmission. Okay, so these are the pramanas. Any questions on this before we actually proceed?
Just a quick one, Prashant. This is Ashish.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. So I I guess I'm getting it, but what my question is, that Shabda Pramanam, is it only for the Shruti, or like how's the general education different from, like does that also depend on Shabda Pramanam?
Yes, yes. So Shruti is a special case of Shabda Pramana, but you also have the general case where anything, including the statements that we are making. For example, I'll give you one example here. Suppose you call me up, you're like, oh, how are you feeling today? And I tell you that, I had a really bad day at work, or I had a bad dream last night, and that just threw my whole day off. You have no choice but to believe it, provided that you look upon me as a reliable narrator. If I am a reliable narrator, such as, like, for example, if a guru is a reliable narrator, and you know that there is reliability because there's Shraddha associated with that, then that becomes another means of knowledge to know how the person's mind is feeling, or how they feel on a certain day, or what they are thinking of. Right? Like you say, a penny for your thoughts. The only way one can convey one's thoughts are through these words. And so these words that are conveyed will form the basis of what you call Shabda Pramana. And that applies for, whether you're teaching mathematics or whether you're teaching physics or whatever, provided it is true. Because sometimes one can teach a theory which may be completely false, isn't it? Right? So it has to be both true, because it has to be true to the object that is being communicated, and one has to have Shraddha in that Pramana for the knowledge to take place. Without the Shraddha, knowledge cannot take place in any Pramana. As we spoke about last time, that even in order for the other 5 senses, the Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha, even for those 5 senses, you need Shraddha in them, except for the fact that we don't think about it now at this age and stage in life, because that's something we developed as infants. Not just infants, but even when we were like newborns, in fact. Like that's when the Shraddha and the senses developed. And I give the example of like my daughter, where she had to like touch everything to know that it's real. The seeing was not enough. But eventually, when she was able to touch things, and she was also able to see things, and those concurred with each other, then she's like, yeah, I can trust my sense of sight. The sense of sight, I believe they can only see up to 6 feet when they are newborn, or they can't see beyond that. It's all fuzzy, and because the concavity of the eyes or whatever is not properly developed at that point. So then later that develops, and then they develop Shraddha in that, because it continues to reward them. The more they use their sense of sight, and the more they rely on their sense of sight, the more that rewards them, because somehow it does give them a true, well, I won't say true, but at least it gives them a representation of the world, whatever the reality of the world may be. And it's good enough for their daily transactions. So provided that there's a reliable narrator or reliable teacher, or whatever it may be, physics or whatever. Or let's say if I ask, you Ashishji, that okay, how many rotis did you eat tonight, for whatever reason, because I may be concerned with that, and you will say I ate 4 rotis. I have no choice but to accept that, and then that becomes Shabda Pramana, because I have no other way to know it unless you convey it to me. So a reliable narrator has to convey it, and that becomes Shabda Pramana. And here what we are positing is that the most reliable of all narrators that one can think of would be the Rishis. And therefore the Vedas are also the Shabda Pramana, because my speech may be colored, shaped, derived from my own biases, my own prejudices. I may have certain proclivities, I may have certain attitudes, I may have certain view and perspective of life, which will bias the things that I convey, possibly, right? Especially if it's concerning certain very nuanced points. Or I may have certain biases if I write a textbook also, but for the most part, one can say, yeah, most of it, it's working because you have certain associated evidence and proofs for it and whatnot. But when it comes to the Rishis, we take it as a fact that okay, because it's not the work of the Rishis, in which case there could be an introduction of bias, but it's the very transmission of the very reality that is conveyed through the Vedas. Therefore we accept it as Shabda Pramana in its fullest. And the Vedas are a special form of Shabda Pramana only because what's contained in the Vedas can never be contradicted or overwritten or arrived at, for that matter, through other Pramanas. There's no other way to arrive at the Vedic knowledge except through the Vedas themselves. and therefore they are given a special case, in a very pristine case. Any further thoughts?
No, thank you. Very beautifully explained.
So
Thank you.
Thank you. So on that note, we can start. So there was this one thing I wanted to share. You can't see my screen now, right? Let me share it again. 1 second. So something very interesting. This was like a thing I came across a couple of years ago. So I'm just curious. Can you all see this? The screen?
Yes.
Okay, so what color do you perceive this dress as? Like, what two colors does it constitute of?
My guess is black and blue.
Black and blue. Okay, others?
Purple
I think it's
and golden.
Purple and golden. Okay. Others?
golden, Wedgwood blue.
Okay. So we heard black and blue. We heard golden and purple and one. Give me a few more.
Grey and blue.
Sorry.
Grey and blue.
Gray and blue. Okay. Go on.
White and gold.
White and gold. Okay. Does anybody see what's happening? We've gone from black and blue to white and gold. Okay. I personally see white and gold, and Unnati, my wife, is like, "Are you crazy?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "This is 100% black and blue," and I'm like, "I see white and gold," and at least one other person said white and gold. So then I said, "You know what? Let's go to the greatest of deciders, like the greatest of educators, the final judge." So I went to my 3-year-old and I asked her, like, "What do you see? What colors are these?" She's like, "Black and blue." I'm like, "Okay, fine." So the point is, sometimes even your senses are not able to see this dress and reveal it for what it is. And there was a question a few 2 sessions ago, I suppose, which is that, okay, why should we treat the Shastra as an objective Pramana if there are so many different interpretations? Look, even your senses here are being interpreted differently. Continuing the recording. Yeah, you can have different interpretations for the same thing, which does not make all the interpretations right per se, but how does one reconcile that? You reconcile all the interpretations to see what is the entire Tatparyam of Shastra, because eventually what will happen is, when you put a sufficient number of these interpretations together, somewhere you will find a contradiction, somewhere. And then those interpretations have to be eliminated, and the one that stands the test of Tatparya Nishchaya is the correct way to understand Shastra. So what I mean is that this lack of consensus, even on a damn dress, that white and gold versus black and blue, somebody will be like, wait, these are two completely opposite colors. Like, where does one, like, I see this as gold and I see this as white, and somebody else sees this as black and somebody sees this white as blue. You can't even agree on these things, right? And so that way, and the best part is, this is not even an optical illusion. It's actually a proper photo of a dress taken in a store. And by the way, the answer is, in a different picture, this dress is actually black and blue, but based on how it was framed here, or maybe there was some front light, or the way it's lit, it appears white and gold to some people. So anyway, I just thought this is a good point to share, to show, to illustrate rather, that this interpretation thing can happen in many contexts, not just Shastra. Okay, so questions, and we'll proceed now. I think Smitaji, maybe what would you do?
Yeah.
You can read, and
Yeah.
we'll take questions.
Okay. Karana, Karya, Prakriya. One of the main Prakriyas is Karana, Karya, Vada. Brahman is presented in the Upanishads as the cause of everything, from which all these elements have come, by which all these are sustained, and into which all these go back. Understand that to be Brahman. Further, Brahman, the cause of the world, is Satya. The Jagat presented in this Shruti in the form of the five basic, subtle and gross elements is the effect, Karya, of Satya, the Karana. Jagat being an effect, Karya, is Mithya as revealed by the famous Vacharambhana Shruti. The Shruti presents the Karya as neither Satya, that which exists, nor Tuchya, that which does not exist, but as Mithya, that which has a dependent existence. The Jiva's physical body, mind and senses are all within the Karya and are therefore Mithya. But the Jiva is not created and its nature Swarupa is Satyam Jnanam Anantam, the limitless consciousness that is the reality of everything.
Just one pause. Any questions so far? Doubts or something related? Okay, we can proceed.
Okay.
Just pause
If
if anybody has.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah.
If a product, Karya, is non-separate from the Karana, the material cause, then the cause and effect are not two separate things. The effect is not separate from the cause, and the cause, being what it is independent of the effect. The Chandogya Upanishad therefore makes an opening statement, Pratigna, that knowing one thing, everything would as well be known. This Pratigna is established by proving that the Karya is non-separate from the Karana. Therefore the Karya is essentially the Karana. A clay pot is but clay. If there is more than one pot, then also it is clay. The plurality of the Karya does not make any addition to the clay. If the elemental Jagat, which includes my physical body, prana, senses and mind, is from one jewel Brahman, then that Jagat, being an effect, is non-separate from the cause Brahman. Brahman is the uncreated Tvam, you the Self, which is Satyam Jnanam Anantam. The recognition of this fact that I am that Satyam Brahma and that this Jagat is non-separate from me while I am independent of the Jagat is the result of the teaching of Vedanta. That recognition of oneself as Sarvatman as the whole
Sarvatman.
is Sarvatma as the whole is the ultimate end called moksha. The Upanishads, praising the one who has the knowledge of oneself as everything, say that one crosses sorrow. The Upanishads rightly say that there is no samsara for the person because he or she is free from all sense of limitations.
Okay. So, questions, thoughts so far? Yeah. So one thing is, as you can tell, this what we have over here is quite complex, right? In terms of there's already an assumption that some of these things are already understood. Some of these expressions are already familiar, such as Satya and Mithya or Tucham, and then you have Karana, Karya, all of these things. So just one point is that this text is sort of a clarifying text for somebody who has a basic context of Vedanta, doesn't necessarily know it deeply, but has a basic context, and it tries to yeah, and it tries to remove any misconceptions one may have about the teaching. So that's what it's trying to do, and it will help both the beginner to familiarize that okay, these are certain protocols that are already embedded in our culture which one is sort of familiar with, but at the same time it will also help people who are quite familiar with the teaching to further refine their understanding of it. But the next text that we'll take will actually start from the ground level, so this familiarity will serve as a backbone. It's very similar to how in the Bhagavad Gita, Swamiji often says, or even if you look at the Upanishads for that matter, or Tattva, the samvada is between the Guru and the Shishya. And in that samvada, the Shishya already seems to be having a lot of context, and because that is why the questions are so beautiful. And the questions, the quality of the questions make way for a quality answer. And so when the if oftentimes you'll come across certain almost baseless questions, right? Like, I mean, not, I won't say baseless, but they are something that one clarifies as a child. You probably shouldn't be clarifying that when you're like in your 40s or 50s, such as, oh, why does this god stick their tongue out, or why does this person have so many arms, or why does this Devi have like 8 arms and whatever, right? Like, certain things are good. Like, you can always answer those questions. There's nothing wrong in it. But what I mean is that if you look at Arjuna's questions, like, okay, they are very profound. They are somewhere relevant to all of us in our lives. All of us go through the same predicaments that Arjuna did with regards to his despondency, the attachment to the family, so on and so forth, the fear, the inability to act, being paralyzed in a situation where you are supposed to take action. So all of these things, we've all been through it, whether it's in terms of stage fright, or whether it's a job interview, or whether it is confronting somebody for doing the right thing, to establish the right thing. We've all encountered many situations in our life, dealing with the loss of a loved one, dealing with disease, dealing with sickness, all of these things. So, the more generalized the question is, and when I say generalized, I don't mean generalized in the sense that it's more of stemming from a deeper place. And when a question is at the surface, it only addresses the applicability is very limited. But when a question takes a plunge into the very conceptual realm and the very abstract realm, the answer can apply to many places, many different situations as well. And so what we find oftentimes in the question and answers that are already expressed in the form of samvada in a shastra is that the students have already this deep context. They don't have clarity, and that's why they work things out with the acharya. But the context is already there, because this is the greatness of a culture that is molded by the value system of Sanatana Dharma. So today you would be hard to say nowadays, but ideally, when we were at least growing up, and everybody on this call, I don't know about the current generation, but nobody had to ask what is karma. You took it for granted. You took karma for granted. You took rebirth for granted. You took the fact that there is an Atma for granted. Right? You took the fact that there is Ishvara, Bhagwan for granted. These were not things that we somehow went to college and then be like, oh yeah, there's this thing called karma. No, by the way, there's this thing called Bhagwan. It was woven into us from the very time we took birth. And we've seen our parents, our grandparents, we've seen our society, we've hopefully come across certain media where these things were well brought out. Like, when I was just born around the time when this Ramayana started airing on DD, I don't have memory of Ramayana at all, because I was probably like a few months old. But I do have memories of this B.R. Chopra's Mahabharat, which aired in, I think, 1992 or 93 or something like that. And I remember that all members of my family. In fact, for anybody who's been to Mumbai, there's this very famous road called Marine Drive, and it's a very busy road. It's one of the busiest roads in the whole country. And when Mahabharata and Ramayana were airing, the entire road would be empty, where you can actually sleep in the middle for a few seconds at least. And the only thing that will be moving are these public buses, these BEST buses, public transport. You won't see any cars, you won't see any bikes, because everybody is glued either to their television or to their neighbor's television. Somebody had a TV where Mahabharata and Ramayana were taking place. And so, I grew up and I saw these people, like, oh, there's this guy with a big long beard. And then later I'm like, oh yeah, that's Bhishma. And then, you see this guy with like golden armor, and I'm like, okay, that's Karna. And then you see this person on a chariot and this person sitting next to him and looking very sad and asking questions. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Arjuna and Krishna. But the thing is that we had exposure to this, either through this B.R. Chopra channel, or through your grandmother's stories, or through whatever tales that are narrated in the family. So in the current generation, unfortunately, this trend is broken, because first of all, our families have become smaller, and our lives have become more individuated and individualized, and we are less, and when the times that we do interact with society and we do have communion with other people, it's at a cafe to drink coffee, or it is to discuss cricket, or just to discuss Bollywood. But at least I remember that my father telling me that when he was growing up, his his aunt, his uncle, other people would assemble in the kitchen. They would cook together, and the elders would tell the youngsters stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata and the Puranas, and they grew up with it. And so I'm just sort of lamenting, and it's a semi-rant also, that when you see the Samvada in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, you see that context is there. But unfortunately today, when I talk to many young people, they literally ask questions like, okay, what is karma? Like, and I wouldn't expect that like a 20-year-old to still have that question, because they've heard of it, but they don't even know what it means. So anyway, we'll proceed with. So what is being built over here in this text are the different prakriyas that one takes the help of in order to point us towards the truth. So last time I gave this example. I think somebody had a question, which is why can't the prakriya be turned into a system? And every prakriya is by its nature flawed. A prakriya is a methodology or an approach that points you towards something. But if one gets married to that prakriya, it's like getting married to the finger that is pointing at the moon, but you'll miss the moon if you focus only on the finger. Ultimately, you have to make a leap from that finger in order for you to see the moon. But the finger is only pointing you in that certain direction. So same way, all of these Vedanta prakriyas that we have are only pointing you in the direction of the Atma, but none of them by themselves are perfect, because every single prakriya has an example embedded in it, and every example is a worldly example, because all examples are worldly, otherwise they wouldn't be examples. And every example that is worldly is mithya, because the world is mithya. And therefore everything that we talk about in terms of prakriya is mithya, which is, it is a dependent reality. It is not an absolute thing. But they are trying to point towards the absolute, which is the very self, which is Brahman, which is Satyam. And so one has to be careful while interpreting a certain mithya prakriya and not take it too seriously, but take it just seriously enough so that you can leap off of it and see what is being indicated. Okay, so first prakriya we looked at was the karana karya prakriya, which is the cause and the effect as the cause inhering in the effect. That means that in Shastra we say that the cause and the effect are not separate. The cause is inhering, it is embedded in the effect as its very substance. Just as the pot has its effect, is the effect, and the clay is the cause. But the clay pervades the pot because the pot is nothing but clay. So the clay does not have any, the pot does not have any weight of its own. It's only something you call a nama rupa, a name and form. What has weight is the clay. Okay. So we'll look at the next one, Smitaji.
Yeah. Avastha Prakriya. Another important Prakriya employed in the Upanishads is an analysis of the three states of experience: waking, dream and sleep. In this analysis, the Shastra employs Anvaya Vyatrika reasoning to arrive at the true nature of oneself. The waker and the waking world are absent in both dream and sleep. The dreamer and the dream world are both absent in both waking and sleep. In sleep, the status of the dreamer and the waker is absent.
Okay. We can proceed to the next short.
Okay. If the status of the subject is real, one cannot give up the status at any time. What is intrinsic to an object should be present in the object as long as the object exists. If it is not present, then it is an incidental attribute. An example often cited in this context is the crystal assuming a color in the presence of a colored object. If the color is intrinsic to the crystal, it will be present therein as long as the crystal exists. But when the colored object is taken away, the color which was seen in the crystal disappears. Therefore, the color assumed by the crystal is incidental, upadhikrita. In the sleep experience and also in the waking state, where there is absence of the subject-object relationship, there is no status for oneself as the subject. Hence, the subject-object status must be assumed to be incidental. Analyzing these experiences, the Shastra presents the Atma as free from all attributes imputed to it.
Any questions so far? Because this is definitely a deep topic, but we should think about it further a little bit. Or if I can even clarify any of what we just read. Good with everyone? Okay. So, should we continue?
Sure?
Yeah, please.
Any attribute is purely incidental and not intrinsic. If Atman is attribute free, is it non-existent Shunya? No. Because the concept of Shunya itself is a piece of knowledge implying a subject, a knower. The Shastra describes the Atma as Jyoti, Jnanam, Sakshi, Cheta, Chitta, and so on. All these words mean the content of the subject, the knower, which we may call consciousness.
Okay. Yeah. Continue.
Continue?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Consciousness is invariable in all the states of experience, while consciousness itself is free from any attribute. Therefore, when the Shastra uses the word attribute-free Atma, Nirvishesha Atma, it means the Swarupa of Atma is pure consciousness. All attributes such as doership and enjoyership are purely incidental. Acharya Gaudapada and others who came later deftly handled this prakriya presented in the Mandukya Upanishad to unfold the fact that the self is Brahman and the world implying the subject-object relationship is purely an incidental attribute of Brahman and is therefore mithya.
Okay. Anyone would like me to clarify any of this?
This topic will be covered in very much detail in other days. That will take a class.
So could you repeat? There's a little bit of background sound.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that these topics will be discussed in detail in the later text that we take.
Yeah, definitely. But I thought just now, if anybody is really scratching their head over it, it might be a good opportunity to just get a better sense of it.
Because they are very heavy topics for Vedanta.
Yeah.
So I thought I would go on for now.
Okay. Anybody else feels the same, that we can continue, or it's a good place to stop and take questions? All good? Okay. So it either means that this is perfectly clear or it's perfectly unclear, one of the two. Those are the only two situations when there are no questions. Okay, so we can look at the next one.
Okay. Panchakos.
Yes. Sorry?
It is both clear and unclear.
It is both clear and not clear.
Clear and unclear.
एक second, sorry, I have to mute someone's mic just because I'm getting a lot of background sound. Sorry about that. Could you please repeat?
No, I'm joking, man. It is both clear and unclear at the same time.
So then that's worth a discussion, I suppose, right? Because
Yes, it's worth a discussion.
so this is, and I mean this with all sincerity, in the sense that usually there's a curve of asking questions. Like I don't know how to best describe it, but I like putting things visually. So see, this is very interesting. I was thinking about this a long time back when I started my own studies, and this is you have the XYZ axis. Sorry, my drawing is pathetic and my handwriting is even worse. But this is time. T is time, and these are the questions that you have, and this is how it usually looks. Okay. it kind of looks like a bell curve, right? Because in the beginning, because the topic is very unfamiliar, and because one has only looked at some content but not enough content, there are not many areas of which one can leap off to ask questions. But as one gets exposed to more and more and more content, everywhere, like at that moment the number of questions will grow, and then at some point it will peak, when one has been very immersed in the teachings, and eventually as clarity starts coming, the peak will again start falling off, and this is kind of like the area where you start feeling more resolved, that okay, what, I had so many questions and many of them are getting resolved, and in this area one will be like, oh wait, there's so much, and one question leads to like three other questions and so on. So if it's both clear and unclear, it's kind of like in that starting phase, which we've all really experienced, obviously. So here's what I would say. What Shastra is trying to, what Pujya Swamiji is trying to convey over here, are these different prakriyas which are all present within the Upanishads. Okay, Upanishads or Bhagavad Gita, or even sometimes in the teachings of Adi Shankaracharya or Gaudapadacharya or any of the other Mahatmas in the tradition. And so what is a prakriya really for? A prakriya is the only way through which one can get a sense of what the Atma is all about. What it really means to the meaning that shines in one's mind when you hear the word Atma. Because right now the word Atma is just another vocabulary word. Every word has two, you have Shabda and you have Artha. You cannot separate them, they are married. So the Shabda component is something that's evident to us because there's a name and it has a form. And the Artha is the meaning that is conveyed through the Shabda. And what one is aspiring to do through the study of Shastra, through the study of the Upanishads, Vedanta, is to impute the right meaning, which is the Artha, to the Shabda. And the right meaning requires multiple things. First is there's a story of the Mtt Cup. It's a very famous parable. I don't know where it started from, but basically there's a student who goes to the teacher, and he's like, okay, I'm ready to learn and whatever. And so then when he sits with the teacher, he just goes about ranting, by the way, I've studied this Upanishad, and I've studied that Upanishad, and I've studied this commentary, and I've studied that commentary, and I've read this on this source, and I've read that from that source. And so Guru stays silent for like 5 minutes, and he just lets this guy talk. And then later what the Guru does is that he's asking the student, would you like to have some tea? And so then the student so student is, okay, now will you teach me? So the Guru actually refuses. He's like, no, I can't. So then he's like, okay, why not? So he doesn't say anything. He's just asking a question, like, would you like to have some tea? And so he's like, yeah, sure, I'll have some. So he's pouring tea, and the glass is full, okay, and he keeps pouring more and more and more till it starts spilling out. So the student is, are you mad? Like, can't you see the glass is full? He's like, exactly. I can't pour anything more because you're already so full of it, right? Whatever it implies, you can add anything you want to it. But so the point being that what happens is that we are all full of it, right? We are all full of this because our life's experience tells you that you're not the Atma. That is the tragedy of life, that everything that we have encountered in our life, every relationship that we've had with outsiders, unless they are satsanga or mature, wise people or learned people, but for the most part, I'm talking about society, whether it's at a workplace or it's a colleague or it's a secular friend, everything implies that you're not the Atma. Everything implies that when you watch an advertisement on TV, you need to buy this product to feel better than what you are, or to be a bigger person than you are, because if you ride a nice fancy Lexus, somehow that's improving upon who you are as an individual. Or you buy that refrigerator and somehow that's a great thing. Or that Raymond ad, everybody's watched these TV ads, that used to come, Raymond the complete man. So if you wear this particular suit, only then and then alone are you a complete man. Without that, you're incomplete. So everything we encounter basically tells you that you are a nothing. You're a nobody. You are a useless, limited creature who has to slog your whole life at the workplace, or you have to slog your whole life to impress a guy or a girl, to get into a relationship, to do this, because these things are required in order for you to be a complete person. So therefore the experience basically tells us that we are limited. That is our life experience. But what Vedanta says is a very bold thing. It doesn't promise you heaven after death. It says, Arey bhaiya, you are free here and now. You're not limited, you're the limitless self. You're not insecure. You're the very act of security. You're the very being that is alone secure. You don't require happiness. You're the very nature of happiness. You're the very content of anandam. Anandam is you. The little bit of happiness you pick up here and there by doing this or by doing that or by whatever it may be. Vedanta says, you're already full in yourself. There's nothing else that's remaining. So Vedanta makes a very bold statement, a very bold conclusion, and it backs it up. It backs it up also. It's not just a random statement. This is the very truth. It doesn't have to prove itself to you. It becomes self-evident when you commit to a certain lifestyle that's associated with the teaching, and then the internalization starts beginning to happen. So what all these prakriyas are doing is, first it is separating the non-self from the self. It is saying that, okay, first of all, by the way, be very clear that there is something that is you and there is something that is not you. That is what it is doing. Okay, it is doing this Drik Drishya Vivekaha, or it is doing this the whole Vivek, right? Atma Anatma Buddhi. It is establishing Atma Anatma Buddhi. That what do you take the Atma to be? The body? Do you take your Atma to be the mind? Do you take the Atma to be your accomplishments in life? Do you take the Atma to be your feelings? If you are hurt today, is the Atma hurt? If you are happy today, is the Atma happy? If you are sad today, is the Atma sad? Do you take Atma to be your health? Do you take Atma to be your intelligence? Do you take Atma to be a sense of security? Do you take Atma to be the extended family security that you have? And these are all the common experiences. In Vedanta, no, that's not you. That's all anatma. It is not you. The not you is anatma, and the you is atma. So first it is creating a separation. Then somebody will wait. Arey bhai, I thought we are studying Advaita. Isn't this duality? So right now you're talking that everything is Advaita, Ekam Advaitam Brahma. And now you're like, there's Atma and there's something that's not Atma. That's just the starting point. Then the point you actually arrive at is the Anatma that we spoke about is also the Atma, eventually. But the Atma is not the Anatma. Okay? A equals B, but B does not equal A. We'll come to that. It doesn't have to be super duper crystal clear at this point. But just to keep in mind that there are, I've tried a lot in my life to negate the things that I study, because the only way I can know that I am clear on something is by trying to disprove it in 1,000 different ways. And I can tell you that there are absolutely, to the best of my understanding, there are no contradictions in Shastra. This just cannot be. Any perceived contradiction with regards to Shastra is only a limitation here. Either we are stupid enough to not understand it, or we haven't yet been exposed to it, or we are misunderstanding it. These three things can happen. And so these prakriyas are basically trying to do exactly what I said, which is, it is first trying to create this Atma Anatma Vivekaha. That there is this Atma, there is this Anatma. And then ultimately it is saying that there is no such thing as Anatma, there is only the Atma. To put it differently, what it is trying to say is, the wave takes itself to be a worthless, insecure wave. And there's a wave in the ocean and it's like crying. It's crying, it's weeping, it's already made of tears, and it's it will shed some more tears also. And then it comes across a second wave. This is a Pujya Swamiji story, not mine. I don't have that much creativity. So what Pujya Swamiji says, wave 1 is crying, is weeping, is moping, and then it comes across wave 2, which is supposedly a very jnani wave, a Mahatma. So wave 2 is saying, what happened to you? So wave 1 says, look at me. Every time I'm born and I'm reborn, and again I go back into the ocean, again I'm born again. And then sometimes there's lightning strike, and then it strikes me, and then all the water gets dried up. Sometimes I get thrown on the beach and this hot sun just vaporizes me. And then sometimes I'm thrashed on these jagged rocks by the Malabar coastline or Pacific coast or whatever it may be. And my life is so miserable. I'm a tiny little wave, and there's so much, the whole world, I've not even explored the whole world. Every time I think that I'm going to go from New York to Hawaii, I drown back again. And then again I'm reborn somewhere else, and I keep missing that place. I can't go to Hawaii only. Look at me, I'm so useless. And then the second wave is saying, Ocha, so what is around you? So he's saying, yeah, it's I see many other waves and I see the ocean. And then he says, okay, what is all of that made of? So he says, yeah, it's all made of water. What are you made of? Water. Okay, that's the end of the story, really, right? So what? Then it's all really water. There's no wave. But from the standpoint of the wave, there is a wave, and there's wave 2, and there's wave 3, and there's also the ocean. But standpoint of water, there is only the water. The wise wave knows that I am nothing but water, and this water alone is the ocean. And the unwise wave thinks that I am a useless wave who's born and reborn and going to die again. That is the useless Ajnani. And the Jnani wave is different. It says I am water. So what we are trying to do through these different prakriyas is, the first thing is, you need to create a distinction between wave and water. You need to tell the wave that, by the way, you are not, there is something called a wave, but you are actually the water. There is a wave also, but you are the water. Then you need to say that, by the way, the wave is also the water only. First you create a distinction between the name and form called a wave and water. So the Atma, you will say, is the water, and the Anatma is the wave. But then you will say, by the way, the wave is also water only. So first you create a distinction between Atma and Anatma, but then you say ultimately it is only the Atma. But what happens if you do that too soon? Because some people, I want to get this out, because again, I think one of the intentions, and I was so happy to start these sessions, is because I can speak very candidly with everyone now at this point. On social media, if there are like 50, 100, 200, 300 readers, somebody is going to feel bad about something or the other. But here, what I can say is, not just a few, but the vast majority of people who profess to teach Vedanta, including certain gurus that you may find, famous gurus or non-famous gurus, not many people get this. There are very few sampradayas that actually are able to nicely articulate these teachings. The other reason I really wanted to start these sessions is like, it's very hard to be grateful for the things I've been blessed for, like just in terms of the acharyas with whom I've had conversations, the questions that they've answered. Like a stupid child, I will just sit by their feet and just ask them all sorts of questions, and I've had this opportunity, and I'm so blessed, and it's just my ability to share a little bit, whatever that I've learned. And I take a deep interest in, I'm a very cross-functional sort of elaborator, so it will not be only one domain, but different subject matters, and I'll try to like weave them together, because I think that paints a larger picture, and it gives you an intuitive feel for what it is that we are studying. So if you think about psychology also, right, let's say somebody is going through some spousal abuse or some family, some issue, some real impediment, and then you go to a psychiatrist, or you go to a psychologist, and the first thing that they do is they'll not be like, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. They will actually ask you, or they will actually make you see yourself to start with as a victim, and they'll make the other person appear as the victimizer, because what they are trying to get you to do is remove that sense of insecurity and the guilt that you may have about yourself. So let's take an example of a rape victim. Okay, so let's say some unfortunate lady has been raped, and there's an assailant, and for a long time she is like, oh, maybe I invited this on myself, right? Because we do know that there is something called Stockholm syndrome, and sometimes when you are in the midst of a perpetrator, I actually I have a friend, obviously I'll keep all that anonymous, who it is and all, but I have a friend who's actually been molested multiple times by one guy, multiple times, and she still remained friends with that guy because there was a sense of guilt that she had about not wanting to leave his company. They were not in a relationship, they were just friends, but he's taken advantage of that situation. And I told her, like, something's wrong with you, you need to go to a psychiatrist, because you are putting yourself through abuse deliberately, and you need to sort that out. So she started taking psychiatric help, and it helped, and she left that whatever person. So okay, so here the point being that initially what we do is we blame the other person, then you start resolving your phobias, and then eventually that blame part also goes away. Same way if you look at it in Vedanta also, or you look at it generally speaking, what we start with doing, which is the right approach, is you distance yourself from that anatma, that you are not the anatma. You think that you are fat, you think that you are short, you think that you are ugly, you think you have a face full of pimples, you think you are losing hair, oh, that is not you, by the way, right? That is the Sharira. It is not who you are. And so then you distance yourself from the source of trauma. Eventually, once you have gained that basic sense of maturity through that process of negation, then you take it all back onto you. But now with fullness, not with that guilt. And so what you do is first you empty the teacup. That this is not me, this is not me, this is not me, this is not me, this is not me. Then you are ready to say this is all nothing but me. Everything is me. But I am not any one of those things. So that is what the prakriyas are trying to do. So I guess I've spoken at length. Does anybody have questions or discussions or comments? We still have another 12 minutes left. All good for today? Then we'll close early. But does anybody have fleeting thoughts? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll connect next week. We'll continue to read, and I'll close off with a Shanti Mantra. I think Ashish ji, you had a question, right? I think with regards to I pinged you back when I think orthodox is dharma orthodox or liberal or something like that. No?
Yeah. No, but I think that can be like included in that dharma discussion we may plan sometime.
Okay.
Like the whole session we can plan. I think someone else also wanted to have a dharma discussion. Maybe we can have it during that time. I think it's already.
I'm not sure if we'll have a separate dharma discussion this one, because I figured I'll just start embedding those things in different discussions that we have as opposed to have a standalone.
Yeah, sometimes like it's not urgent. I just like thought to bring it up. Maybe I could email also in the group and just have a conversation there.
It'll be actually easier for me to just talk about. That's what I mean. Like rather than like doing the email process and separately. So otherwise we'll do it at a different time.
I just wanted to keep it interactive. It wasn't more of a question. It was just an interactive thing. Yeah. I just brought it up in that like different context. I think now may not be the best time to really talk about it.
Okay, sure, got it.
Yeah.
So then we'll meet next week. Okay.
Okay, good.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Namaste everyone.
Namaste.